oh, they're never going to go anywhere, and they can't do anything. Our mini computers and mainframes, they're here for forever, and
Mm-hmm.
our IBM JCL, well, this is we're going to coast on this for the rest of our careers. You have to be receptive to something new, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
also realize when something is brand new that the first iteration of some new generation of anything is not going to be as polished and as perfect as the old generations.
Even Jeff Barr has gone through failures and with trial, error, and perseverance, able to succeed.
Early in my time at Amazon, I was lucky enough to get to travel with Jeff. Jeff, you're the new guy, and so we're
Mhm.
dumping this thing on you. And I'm like, well, what? What are you talking about? They said, well,
Welcome, guys and girls. I do not get nervous or starstruck while I interview others, but today is not such a day. If my voice is a little shaky or if I appear a little nervous, it's because today I'm talking with Jeff Barr, Vice President and Chief Evangelist at AWS. Jeff has been at Amazon for over 21 and a half years. And to give a frame of reference, 99.96% of Amazonians are hired after Jeff. When I started my cloud journey 10 years back, I would search for how to use a S3 bucket or what is this SQS thing. And almost every blog that was able to explain a complex concept in a simpler way will have the author as Jeff Barr. One superpower of AWS is scaling the infrastructure. And if we talk about scaling AWS knowledge, Jeff Barr is that knowledge autoscaler. He has written hundreds of blogs, code snippets, given impactful presentations that helped a generation of people understand AWS services. But above all, Jeff has motivated and inspired more people to learn, implement, and join AWS than he realizes, including me. Jeff, welcome to the show.
oh, thank you, Raj. I hope I can live up to that wonderful introduction. So super happy to be here and to be able to chat with you.
So, you are the first cloud evangelist. So, what is the origin story of the Jeff Barr?
Wow. Okay. So when I was a teenager, this
Yeah,
was back in the 1970s, and this
yeah.
was when microcomputers and personal computers were first coming on the scene. I was lucky enough to be at a little computer club called the Northwest Computer Club that formed here in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of my membership in the computer club, I got hired to work at one of the first actual retail computer outlets in the world where people could actually go and buy computers. So I didn't have a lofty job. I was a teenager. My official job was to simply open up all of the boxes of the magazines and the books and the data sheets and so forth that arrived. And I was supposed to just open them up and put them on the shelves. But being already very interested in computers and super excited by this brand new field, I actually spent a lot of time really reading this material before and during the process of shelving it. And what that did is it gave me a really good in-depth knowledge of this emerging field. How's the hardware work? How does the software work? What's new? What's interesting? And as a result, that meant that I was able to actually, when customers would come into the store, I was often the one that the other employees would point to and say, that long-haired kid over in the corner, he's the one who can actually answer your detailed questions for you. And what is amazing enough, we're talking not quite 50 years ago, believe it or
Mm-hmm.
not, when this was happening. It's hard to believe, but this is almost 50 years ago. That very model of diving deep, one of our Amazon LPs, diving deep into something of interest, understanding it really well, and
Mm-hmm.
then finding joy in explaining to other people, that is really my job description today. Understanding something, explaining it, and then saying, wow, this is actually a really neat hybrid job where you get to use both technical skills and communication / marketing skills.
Yeah. So, how did you come about joining AWS? Like, there was no cloud evangelist before you joined, right? Did you come up with the idea that, hey, I should be a cloud evangelist, or did it come from like Andy Jassy, Jeff Bezos?
So if I were to ever have time to write my total autobiography, I'd
Yeah.
call it a long chain of improbable events. Because what happened was before I came to Amazon, I had spent some time working at Microsoft in the late 90s, and I'd worked
Mm-hmm.
on some very early web services.
Mm-hmm.
If our audience has been around long enough, they might remember WSDL and SOAP and UDDI, and Corba. Let's not forget Corba. All
Mm-hmm.
of these very early, very complex web service technologies and standards. At that point, so I was at Microsoft discussing those early services and using them, investigating them. I left Microsoft to go off and do independent consulting in this very early web services space.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge was, this was around the year 2000. At that point, these technologies were very sophisticated, very hard to understand, and there was no really interesting way to show them off to a non-technical person.
Mm-hmm.
You'd show them off to a technical person, and they would marvel at the fact that you've got two computers talking to each other across the internet. You show that to a business person, they wouldn't really grasp the significance. Right. So I was pretty well connected in the web services world. And at one point very early in 2002, I saw this announcement from Amazon that said, Amazon now supports XML. And being deep into web services, I knew what all XML was all about. So I immediately clicked through, and it turned out that Amazon was just launching a web services API in beta form that will give developers access to the Amazon product catalog. Well, I of course knew what XML was all about. I knew what Amazon was. I was an early customer. Signed up and downloaded this API, started exploring the SDK, wrote some sample code, formed some perspectives and opinions, immediately mailed that back to the company. And as a result of sending in that feedback, they invited me to come in for a meeting, and I got to meet one or two of the original folks. That meeting led to being invited to a developer conference that was held at Amazon headquarters. And this is all still like the spring of 2002.
Mm-hmm.
I get into this meeting, and people are just talking very excitedly about how cool this first service is, because I'm not sure when it was they versus we, because it was they when I started, then it became we after I joined. So they talk about how amazing it is that this service had been launched, and this was simply developer access to the product catalog. So you could make a query to the catalog and get back this very, very rich schema of effectively all of the data about a particular product. You could browse through the hierarchy of the catalog. You could even create a shopping cart, put items in the shopping cart, start checkout. And what struck me during the day, and this was one of those amazing moments where you wish you could just capture it and remember every last detail.
Mm-hmm.
At some point during the day, one of the presenters got up, and he or she said, I don't even remember exactly who it was. They said, we're so excited by the success of this first API. They said, we published it, we made people aware of it just a little bit, and within 48 hours, applications started showing up, finished applications that developers had done what I did. They'd discovered it, downloaded it, built something, shared it. And they said, we're so excited by this that our plan is to start looking around the rest of the company and find other things we can put APIs on. So I absolutely understood the value of web services. I understood what APIs were all about. I understood the idea of effectively turning parts of your website into kind of a developer environment, a developer platform, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so I turned to the person who'd invited me. Her name was Sarah. And I said, Sarah, I've got to be a part of this. And she said, well, we can make that happen for you. And before I knew it, I was being interviewed for a position on the Amazon Associates team. Mm-hmm. I got that, but at that point, I was actually a development manager on the Associates team. But I got on the team, and my first manager, he gave me plenty of work to do, but he also said, Jeff, I know that your true interest in getting here was about the web services. Mm-hmm. So do whatever you'd like to help out that team. And he was wonderfully non-specific about how much time I should put in and mm-hmm. what I should do. It was pretty much just help out that team. A little bit, so I started writing some sample code and helping customers out on the forums. At a certain point along the way, and I wish I could remember this exactly, but I remember the entire team like showing up at my desk and saying, Jeff, you're the new guy, and so we're dumping this thing on you. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? They said, well, we've got this conference appearance, and we don't want to do it, so it's your problem. And I'm like, oh, fine. I love conferences. I'll happily do that for you. So that joke was on them. So I spoke at that one, and a few others showed up, and then not that much later after that, this was sometime in 2023, they came to me and they said, we have this job opening here called Web Services Evangelist, and we've been interviewing people for quite a while, mm-hmm. haven't found a good match, but they said, Jeff, even though you're doing this part-time, you're actually doing the job that we would want out of this person. Do you want this job? And so I looked at the job description and said, yep, I am doing that and I can do that. It was going to involve some more travel, and my family was pretty young at the time, so I made sure that they were going to be good with that. And it was kind of it was before the first half of 2023. I want to say like April, May 2023. I got business cards that said web services evangelist, and there I am. I set up a very simple job description for myself of understand what we have and get it out to developers all around the world. You can always complexify anything you do and add lots of big words, but I said, I'm just going to keep this very straightforward and very simple.
Yeah, I love it. Well, two things. First of all, thanks to Sarah for hiring you. And second of all, so I'm going to show you a couple books I generally don't show, but I exactly know what you're talking about. So I worked extensively in XML as well. I keep them in the bottom shelf because it's like old technology, and I used to work in mainframe, right? So one system will send me messages in XML in Amazon IBM MQ back then, and in the COBOL program, I had to code to parse and all that stuff. So which actually goes nicely to my second question, Jeff. So you started long back with the technology that was considered latest back then, and I started mainframe DB2 XML. But you said that you want to be on the cutting edge of the technology, and you have proved that that is possible. So do you have any advice to the people that they think they're stuck at their career or they want to switch to AWS? How do they go about it?
That is a wonderful question. So my first professional programming job was probably, I think I was about 20, and I was writing assembly language code for the 6502 microprocessor.
Nice.
That was my job. But we were part of a bigger company that was doing all different kinds of consulting, and everybody else was a generation plus older than I was. And I remember being at this little holiday party of some sort, talking to some of these folks that I thought it was like really old. They're probably younger than I am now, but it struck me after talking to a few of these people that they had mostly gotten stuck on a particular kind and generation of technology. And no matter how you would try to just tell them a little bit about the next thing, they would say, oh, this past technology is actually better, and this new thing is never going to catch up. And it's like, well, and I remember talking to them about small computers, like, oh, they're never going to go anywhere, and they can't do anything. Our mini computers and mainframes, they're here for forever. And our IBM JCL, well, this is we're going to coast on this for the rest of our careers. And I can almost remember standing there having that conversation, talking to this person and saying, like, thinking, I can't grow up to be like this. Like, nothing against that person. It was like, I need to be enthusiastically always jumping into the future. I can't get stuck on one generation of technology and think that is somehow the ultimate. Now, there's a couple different elements I think that go into being able to do that. Is you have to be receptive to something new, and you have to also realize when something is brand new, that the first iteration of some new generation of anything is not going to be as polished and as perfect as the old generations. The old generations of anything were launched in a rough form and then iterated either quickly or slowly based on hopefully customer feedback and advances. And so you can't contrast that polished and perfected old thing against the new, somewhat rough and incomplete, but with a lot of potential next thing. Because the new thing is never going to have that iteration already applied to it. You need to be, not only do you need to be understanding of that, but you should realize that if you adopt something early, you have this amazing opportunity to not just use it early and be that early adopter, but by the very nature of the fact that you are the early adopter, you can swim upstream a bit, find whoever created this neat thing, the person or the company, and basically say, hey, I'm one of the first here to use your new offering. I think it's awesome. Here's what I like. Here's what I think where you can go, and offer your feedback, but also your constructive criticism, your encouragement, and let them know that you're there. Now things are different now that we have the internet for the last decades.
Right.
But I remember building things in isolation, and it was so hard to connect with customers in the pre-internet era. You'd build things, you'd package them up, you'd probably go through a couple different levels of intermediaries before those things you built would land in the customer desktop. It was so hard to actually hear back from customers. So these days with internets and email and social media, it's far easier to connect, but you actually need to do it. You need to say, okay, I'm using this brand new, whether it's commercial or open source, let those originators know that you're there and that you find what they're doing valuable. It's even if they're getting paid to do it, that knowing that there's a customer there is going to make a difference for them.
Yeah, I love it. So if I pick out a couple things from what you said, Jeff, one is holiday party. So what that means is networking. So you must go either to the virtual network or to the conferences, the free ones, AWS summits, and talk to other fellow professionals, right? See what's popular, what's coming, which direction customers are going. And second thing, which really resonates with me, is try it out. Even though it's a little bit rough edges, it has rough edges. Bias for Action is my favorite LP. So instead of like doing analysis paralysis, try it out. And if you love it, great. You can dive deep on it and learn more. If not, you can try some other things. But don't get just stuck and think about, I'm just going to post, and take that first step, right? That's what you did.
Exactly.
That's what I try to do.
Exactly. Those, both the networking and the hands-on experience, I think, are valuable. And networking can be very, very simple. In almost every place, anywhere in the world, there is some kind of a meetup. They're getting together to talk about some kind of thing that is of interest to you. And you need to just find it and find like-minded people. You should probably volunteer to help out a little bit with organizing or preparing content. All these user groups, the organizers work very, very hard to find a space and get attendees and get a continuous stream of good speakers and get sponsors. Those are opportunities to get yourself a little closer to the center, and you can certainly start on the edge and observe, but you can work yourself toward the center often in pretty easy ways. It's the rare situation that is overwhelmed with people volunteering to help out in some way. Right. So your little bit of effort to do more than zero is going to be recognized and almost always accepted and appreciated.
No, I totally agree. So when I was in Verizon before joining AWS, so I was in mainframe back then, and Verizon was arranging like cloud DevOps days. And that's how I got into it. I'm saying, I'm just going to volunteer. I'm going to give the t-shirts, right? I'm going to show people to their seats. And then I started chatting with other people. And that's how I created connections. And another thing I think is you can always find groups that you resonate with. For example, I was into World of Warcraft and stuff. So I was into World of Warcraft groups. But guess what? After they play World of Warcraft, most of the people, they have IT jobs. So we will talk technology. Right. And then I will join the groups that I'm super passionate about. Like I'm passionate about, let's say, containers. So even though sometimes people think, oh, I got to go after the fanciest thing like machine learning, right? No offense against machine learning. But if you are not interested in machine learning and you just think it's a fancy and you don't find the motivation to try it, go join the Kubernetes group, go join the database group, start contributing. There is opportunity everywhere.
There's something really interesting that you just touched on, and I don't know that there's a word for it, but you establish credibility and you connect in a group with on one axis, but it turns out that a lot of people in that group will have intersecting or parallel interests, and the credibility that you might build up on that primary axis will help you on the other ones. And you say, okay, I'm here to talk about cloud, but by the way, I also know about World of Warcraft, and it turns out that actually works well. And something I continue to push is that we need to come across as whole people. We can't just come across as our title and our job. Right. If you were to see me speak at an event, and if you see, you always want to have a slide to introduce yourself. Yeah. Something I've been doing for the last couple of years is I will put everything about me except I'll start with, I'm my, education and, a husband and a parent and a grandparent and my hobbies. And then I put my title and my employer at the end, because I think being a whole person is really important. Yes. But also if your primary way to describe yourself is your title and your employer, I think that's a little bit dangerous and fragile, because those things can change really quickly. Right. And if too much of your identity is caught up in this is the title that someone else gave me.
Right.
Well, that situation can change in a heartbeat. And if that is your pedestal that you put yourself on, you can fall off that very, very quickly. But those other parts of your life are
Yeah.
often a lot more durable and long lasting.
Yeah, I love it. Also, like we work long hours and we do it because we love it. Unless you are really passionate about that technology, it's very difficult to like, you know, at midnight, if a new launch comes out during reInvent, like I'm just going into the console and checking what's going on, right? In the midnight madness or something.
You know, I always, whenever I'm writing about something, I absolutely insist on getting personal, direct, hands-on experience with
Yes.
every service that I use. And that doesn't mean I can really go in depth and become an expert, but I can
Right.
spend a couple of hours going through the console, making sure I understand the flow, making sure I understand that with some services, you click create, you fill in the parameters, and you get the resource right away. Others have to create some dependent resources and do a bit of a workflow, and it might take minutes and sometimes up to an hour sometimes. None of that's going to be in the documentation,
Right.
but you have to know that in order to speak authentically and accurately about these services. And as a technical blogger, I think your reputation is on the line with everything you write. If you were to write something based on what other people told you, no matter how well intentioned they were, but if they didn't give you all the facts and all the details, then you write about it as if you did it, but you really didn't. To me, that feels very, it feels wrong. It feels inauthentic. It feels like I could be unmasked as a fraud at any point. If what I'll often tell the service teams, I'll say, you know, I'll read their PR FAQ and they'll tell me all kinds of interesting things. I'll say, you all are wonderful. I love you a lot. I don't believe a word you say until I experience it for myself.
Excellent. Actually, that goes into the segue. You are a prolific writer, and a lot of us, including myself, struggle with writing. So, what are some of the tips that you can give us that can help us be a better writer?
Wow. So I struggled with the basics of the English language for my entire secondary school career. And right before I graduated high school, I got the lowest possible grade in high school English. And the day before graduation, my teacher took me aside and said, Jeff, you seem like a pretty sharp person, and maybe you've got a good future ahead of you. Unless you learn how to be a good writer, it's not going to happen. And
Wow.
I had really spent a lot of time trying to, you know, we each have a different way to learn and a different way to approach things. And grammar and parts of speech I didn't find to be very helpful. And to this day, sentence diagramming and nouns and verbs and adjectives and which one to use, if asked to speak formally about that, I will quickly fall off track and have no idea what's going on. But what I did instead, I've always been a very prolific reader. I love to consume written content. So what I learned to do is just be very observant about how authors use words and how they use words, how they convey their message, how they set a scene, especially for punctuation. Punctuation can be challenging, right? Like we always, like I've actually learned, for example, a semicolon. There's like a particular mental feeling you get when you have a semicolon at the right place in a sentence. Like you can feel that when you're listening to someone talk, that, oh, a semicolon belongs here. And being able to actually hear it, almost hear it and sense it, that this is the right way to do something, turned out to be a much more helpful way for me than trying to say, well, you know, diagram these sentences and use parts of speech in this particular way. Now, my work on the AWS News blog, I have developed a bit of a methodology over the years. And one of the things that helps me a lot is to use a mind mapping tool. So when I'm just about ready to get started on writing a new blog post, I'll take one of the famous Amazon PR FAQs. I'll put that on half of my screen. I'll put my mind mapping tool on the other half. And then as I go through and read that PR FAQ, I'll start to build and structure and restructure my mind map to really not just collect, but organize and add some structure to all the facts I get from the document. So once I have gone through that PR FAQ once, I now have a structured representation of all the information I need. I can pretty much discard the PR FAQ at that point. I can use the mind map instead. And the mind map gives me this nice kind of level set view of all the interesting facts. The mind map is invariably way too detailed for me to use it to write everything, but it does put everything in one place. And so I can be very, what's the right word? I can choose the level of detail, and I can choose exactly what I want to focus on. The team will give me some hints, and they'll say, okay, this and this and this are important. I'll take those as great suggestions, but I will also try to form a bit of my own opinion of what I think is important. Occasionally what they'll do is they'll say, we really struggle to get this part right, so say a lot more about it. Well, you have to think about the customer side of that and make sure that do the customers care if they agonize more over one part of it than the other? Maybe, maybe not. Or it might just be one person's favorite part and they want it to be advertised a little bit more. I get that, but I want to make sure I'm being as even-handed as possible for the things that I think the customers are going to resonate with.
Got it. So if I have to summarize, and this is very helpful tips for me as well. So basically work backwards from the customer, think what the customers would learn the most from. Second, follow or check out your favorite authors to see how they are writing things,
Yes.
and then create a process like a mind map that you have. And finally, I think the biggest takeaway, I love this chat because we are peeling the layers kind of. I always think, oh, Jeff Barr, he must be always prolific at second grade, right? You went and got the golden key, right? Like the best writer award and stuff. It's so good to hear that even Jeff Barr has gone through failures and with trial, error, and perseverance, able to succeed, right? So,
yes.
I mean, it's like amazing. So for the viewers, if you think you are stuck in a legacy technology or you think your writing is not good enough, just keep trying and you will get better.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one of the things that has worked really well for me over the years is actually doing things versus putting too much time into the formal part. Like, yeah, you can easily disqualify yourself from a lot of things by saying, well, I could never write any code because there's so many different things between where I am now and writing the code. But write a little bit, get some initial success, and then all of those intermediate steps that you thought were obstacles, when you have a bigger goal in mind, actually being able to solve the problems you want will make all those little obstacles into actually no big deal for you. And that I found applies to my work and to my hobbies as well. So English was not my strong suite in school. Math was always an actually interesting challenge because I spent far too much time on computers and math was not easy at all. And honestly, I didn't really need to use much in the way of math for many, many years. 4 years ago or so, I started doing 3D printing and I started designing a lot of my own objects. And there are visual tools for design, and those are great for certain kinds of applications. But I've been doing things that are more geometric in nature. And so you have to actually write code to do it. Well, suddenly I'm needing to do radiuses and angles and sines and cosines and intersections and triangles and hexagons, all of which were somewhat mysterious to me. And I know that for some people, they'll see a triangle, they'll see the sides and the angles, like, oh yeah, there's this formula, that formula, the other one, and the inverse and all those. That just kind of went way over my head for the most of my education, and I committed none of it to memory. I was aware that it existed for when I might have to use it. Well, here I am at 60 years old plus, finally needing to use any of those things. And because I want to solve interesting problems, I can actually look up these things and I can do it. Now, is it easy? No, I have to draw a triangle and carefully label it and find a picture online and equate the sides to okay, well, this is the alpha and here's the beta, and okay, do the sine of this and the cosine. Okay, now I got it. But I can do it when I really, really want to. And so it's basically learning on demand with a higher purpose, I guess, would be the way to think of that.
No, I love it. I love you like a lifelong student, and that's a really great quality. And I genuinely hope the Jeff Barr autobiography comes out where you can maybe share your actual mind map, a snippet of it, take an example, and show the readers how you do it.
Yeah.
All right. Talking about folks who took risks and failed and then succeeded, Jeff Bezos. My viewers know I love Jeff Bezos. That's one of the reasons why I joined Amazon, right? And you met Jeff Bezos face to face, had meetings with him. any fun story or any learnings that you took from him that stayed with you?
Wow. So early in my time at Amazon, I was lucky enough to get to travel with Jeff to
Wow.
so the O'Reilly, the book publishers, your XML book is from O'Reilly.
Yes.
For a couple of years, they used to run this weekend event called the Foo Camp. It was the Friends of O'Reilly, the Foo Camp. And
Mm-hmm.
just out of total luck, I was invited to be Jeff's technical assistant for a
Wow.
weekend trip to Foo Camp. And so ahead of that, I looked up the backgrounds of every attendee and every company they worked for, and
Mm-hmm.
made sure that if we were to approach any of these people or companies, I could quickly say, Jeff, okay, this is this person, this is what they do,
Mm-hmm.
and give him a really quick introduction
Mm-hmm.
to this. And got to travel with Jeff and got to just experience his intellect. And it was really interesting because we were flying down there and talking about different companies. And what I found fascinating about the way he thought was that this was kind of at a time when a lot of early internet companies were struggling,
Yeah.
and a name would come up, and what Jeff would often say, well, think about that company, and he'd say they thought they were in this particular business, but then he would actually remap that and say, but the reality is that wasn't their business. And he would give you this much more expansive and kind of tilted 30 degrees in 4 dimensions picture and say, this was their actual business, but they didn't truly get it. And you think about it for 2 minutes, it's like, yeah, he was right. That's the way it was working with Jeff. So being able to see that his mind worked in a very observant and insightful way, and quite analytical, but very fun to be with, and
Mm-hmm.
not deadly serious at all. The famous Jeff laugh is true. And
True.
back when we were in our original PacMed building, and you'd know when Jeff was on the floor. You'd hear that incredible, just
Laugh.
unique laugh.
No, I love it. And also, I really like the sense of humor of Jeff because, being a CEO and founder of Amazon is not an easy job. You see, he goes on to these news interviews, and the host is trying to corner Jeff to say something like a weird or awkward. But Jeff has incredible sense of humor. I remember the host asked, Jeff, how do you feel being the richest man in the world? And Jeff said, well, my life was fine when I was the second richest man in the world, right? I mean, and then the way he would explain things, how he would go back to the customer obsession, I just love it.
There was a time when he and I got to work together really closely when we were there was a time when we were traveling together and doing some of the early publicity for AWS. And we were in a small group formulating messaging. I often would get little notes from him in the early days about particular blog posts that he liked, and that was always very encouraging. And then one of the best memories I do have is that my wife and I were at one of the Amazon holiday parties, and we're in a long line, and then Jeff saw me standing in line and came over and he said hi to me. And it was like,
Wow.
whoa, he recognized me. And it was like, wow, I guess I left a little bit of an impression there. That was just a really neat standout memory.
Yeah, that's incredible. All right, switching gear. This is 2024, so no interview goes without mentioning Gen AI. So what's your recommendation, Jeff? Like, how can folks who are already in IT, they have some existing skill set, maybe on-prem, maybe AWS, how can they integrate their existing knowledge with Gen AI?
All right, so it's a really interesting new technology, and I think if you don't get some experience now and understanding, you're going to regret it in a couple of years, because you need to understand what is a model, what's an LLM, what's RAG, what are prompts, what are all the different models, and what is a trade-off, for example, between the size of the model and the speed with which it can generate. So you can read about all that, but the thing is, if you read, you're going to quickly go from here's an interesting title of a academic paper to you're going to be so deep into like really difficult math. You're going to miss the value.
Right.
Which reminds me actually of relational databases. Let's come back to relational databases later.
Yeah. I have a book for you there too.
Oh, no. Put that one away.
Shows my age, Jeff.
Yes.
Shows my age.
But put that next to like my Perl programming books,
Yeah.
which I never need to see again.
Yeah, but going back, yes.
So there's a lot of great ways to get started with Gen AI. You can open up the Amazon Bedrock console, and there are multiple playgrounds there for doing text or images or chat. You can choose between many different models. You can write prompts. You can see the outputs. You don't have to write any code. You simply enter a prompt. I was having some fun yesterday. I was in a call and we were talking about, do we really need to actually introduce the idea of generative AI to audiences anymore? And I had this picture, every so often we'll see these things of like a little like group of they call it the undiscovered tribes, they're suddenly discovered. And it's a really kind of weird Western way to look at the world. But it's like, okay, an undiscovered tribe has been found, and now we're going to go and we're going to introduce them to our way of life, which isn't like a very weird way to think about it. But I had this like cartoon picture in my head of like that this helicopter is descending on this tribe, and the tribe is like holding up these signs like, we already know about generative AI, don't bother to tell us. And so that was my quick thought like 2 days ago. And then yesterday morning, I got on with Amazon Bedrock and I put in a prompt. I iterated only through maybe 2 or 3 quick prompts and made a really cool image of this jungle clearing and a helicopter and all these people colorfully dressed holding up a big sign. Wow. And it was exactly what I pictured in my mind, which was super, super fun to do. I maybe iterated less than 10 times in the course of maybe 20 minutes to get a really, really cool picture. And like that, but that ability to go from I have an idea to the realization of the idea, that's what so much of this is all about, where you can very, very quickly either experiment or prototype or go to production with these ideas so quickly. So we've got Bedrock, which is a great way to experiment. We've also got Party Rock, which is a super awesome way to build different kinds of applications. Right now, as we speak, I'm in the middle of, we ran a hackathon to have folks build cool apps for Party Rock. And I'm one of the judges, and I've been going through apps. I just went through 2 this morning. So much creativity that people are building with Party Rock. And just, you look at it, it's like, how did you think to do that really cool thing? Like, never would have thought to do any, I don't want to spill any of the beans on what I've seen, but I've seen some really, really cool stuff. And I'm really super impressed by the different things. But the basic pattern here is be the early adopter, try things out, get some practical hands-on experience, understand it for what it is. Probably like always look to the future and realize that any of the things you're associated with, they're going to get better over time. That's the pattern. Right. And you almost never want to write something off as like, oh, it's no good. You can say, well, let me sample it again in a month and see the direction of where it's going. But it's way too easy to look at the first iteration of something and say, nah, it's not there. But bookmark that and tell yourself, I need to come back to that and check it out again. Okay, now I should explain that parallel with relational databases and LLMs. Okay, so when I was in college, and college for me was actually always part-time in the evenings. I didn't get to go to like regular like college during the day, like most of the people I grew up with. So college was always this thing you do between like 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. at night. But I took this database class, and this was the early 1980s. So relational databases were a new thing. And so this guy named Cod was like the father of relational databases. And relational databases, and there were all these things called first normal form and second normal form. It was a massive amount of math to prove that each of these databases was unique. Not unique, that there was not redundancy in the columns and the keys. And this was like considered a really big deal. You get deeply immersed in these axes and lemmas and proofs of why these normal forms were better. The actual cool utility of here's a couple tables and you can join them together, that was totally lost in the hundreds of pages of information about relational databases. So I think I did a little bit of that for the course. Didn't really do anything with databases until I started building a site with MySQL many years later. And suddenly you're just like, oh, I've got 2 tables and I can join them together on a common attribute. The immediate coolness and power of that never came through in those hundreds of pages of axes and lemmas and proofs. And some of that was wonderful, but some of that was just all kind of baked into the way you do things with the relational database. If you get too caught up in the formalism sometimes, those trees get in the way of saying there's actually a really nice forest here.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, 100%. Like when the Lambda came out, I remember going into discussions with my work colleagues that, oh, what are the pros? What are the cons? Oh, how do we do? This is a totally different paradigm, right? And then, like literally, when we went into the console, spun up a Lambda, put some codes, and the wow, holy moly, right? We did not need to select AMI. We did not need to select operating
Mhm.
system, all that stuff. It just came up, executed our code. That's way better than
Yeah,
going through the pages and pages of theory, how Lambda is running under the hood, all that stuff.
exactly. I still remember one of the first demos of Amazon RDS that I ever gave. And we had just launched RDS a few days before,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in this really small meeting, and the tables were set up. So we had like two parallel tables, and I was sitting on one, and the customer was like on the other table facing me.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were projecting up on the wall, and I quickly showed how you could pull up the RDS console and create a database instance. And we supported MySQL was the first database instance. So
Mm-hmm.
I do that, and I can see that they're like kind of like they're hitting each other with their knees underneath the table. I'm like, that's weird. What's up with this? And they
Mm-hmm.
said, you just showed us in a few minutes what our DBA hadn't done for us in 6 months, and that they finally did. They didn't do it the way we wanted it. And like that demo of like a go from open up and just create that database instance. And I don't think we've had the console at that point. I think that might have been purely from the command line. I'd
CLI.
have to go back
Mm-hmm.
and check. But that live demo of this is how
Mm-hmm.
easy it is to get a database up and running
Mm-hmm.
really changes people's understanding and appreciation for how powerful all this is.
100%. On that note, right, which goes nicely into my next question. When you started, there was basically one AWS service. You were there, and when I started, there were 30, and now there is over 200 AWS services. So, how will you recommend someone to start learning AWS if they start today?
So definitely don't try to learn all of them.
Yeah.
It's practically
Yeah.
impossible to learn all of them, much less even know. I think for most people, knowing all the names and being able to say one interesting thing about that isn't obvious from the name is going to be a challenge. So pick one part of one service and solve a real problem for yourself. Launch an EC2 instance or run a Lambda function that does something really simple, or create a bucket and put something in it and then retrieve it, console, CLI, programmatically, whatever you want to do. Do one really good thing, pat yourself on the back for having had a good success, and say, okay, I've gone from zero to something. The apprehension of the zero to something is often that first step on the journey, is because I think we all want to organize and plan, and we're thinking, okay, I have this really long journey ahead of me, but then you think, well, what if this and this and this and this happens along the way? Then what do I do?
Yeah.
That was the old me, and the new me is much more, we're going to start on this journey. We're going to build up enough momentum as we get started that if we hit an obstacle, we're going to let ourselves down if we don't figure out a way past that obstacle. Like when I'm designing cool stuff to print, I will start with a little sketch or an idea and thinking, there's a bunch of stuff here I don't actually know how to do yet, but I'm going to be so close to the solution that it would be kind of like personally embarrassing not to solve it. And this is just art. I'm not, my livelihood isn't dependent on this. It's just art, but it's like, I just want to solve this problem. So I have to just, we sometimes talk at Amazon about, you have to kind of paint yourself into a corner and then engineer your way out. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Yes, 100%. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, talking about.
I've also got a good book on my shelf. I can't reach
Okay.
it. Okay, there's a classic book called The Mythical Man Month. You've probably heard of.
Yeah.
So this was written back in the days of the early mainframes. And one of the lessons I've taken from that book is a constrained design gives you a better solution, which means when you're in a situation where you have unlimited resources, all the people, all the memory, all the CPU cycles, all the budget, all the time, you're going to be so open-minded and imaginative. You're going to spin up the most like over-engineered thing ever. And it's going to take you a long time to do it. Whereas if you say, well, you've got 2 people and a month and you've got this limit of memory or CPU or whatever, thinking within that box is going to help you to be really creative and to say, what is the best I can do under those circumstances? And that always gives you a better solution. Not sometimes, it always does. When there are no limits and boundaries, you just keep thinking more expansively. But being able to say, okay, this is all I can do, and what is the best I can do with that? You get
100%.
results.
Yeah. I really like first principles thinking. So with those constraints, I personally try to see like how can I break this objective down to the smallest logical chunk, and then how can I solve it with what services that's available to me, and then I keep building up. It's like, you know, when Jeff Bezos talks about creating the Blue Origin rockets, he doesn't think about the whole thing. He breaks it down to the smallest part, and then he keeps solving it, right?
Yeah.
And keep doing it.
Now, when you're doing that, sometimes you have to do it in a top-down way, and you're saying, I can't make any progress until there's one central thing that we need to do, and unless we can do that, the rest will never work. Some people will say, we got to solve that, and then once that is now a success, we can do the rest. And there's a lot of situations where that's the only way to proceed. But there's others where you say, I'm going to do the 90% that I can do, and I will start thinking about that last bit, and then I'll be so close to completion that I have no choice but to finish up that last bit, and you'll probably have maybe figured out better the environment and the constraints and your kind of background thinking about solutions as you do it. Whereas if you'd said, I can't make any progress until I solve this part of it, you might never actually, there's probably some physics thing where you're starting from zero and you have no momentum whatsoever. So quite often building that superstructure and say, I'm going to put a dummy thing in the middle just to return fake results until I have the rest. Make that superstructure really good and polished so you're really happy with it. Say, okay, now I just have to get that last little central piece in, and we're going to be good here. That's gotten me into so many good situations of.
Love it. Basically, don't boil the ocean, get started. And as you keep doing stuff, you will figure out more stuff, and you can use that knowledge to build that last key.
Right. And you'll probably have a much better understanding at that late point in the process anyway than you did. And sometimes you're designing some big system and you just say, okay, here's the core part. I'm going to build this. But sometimes you say, let me just kind of lay out the flow, and I'll get these other pieces going. It's gonna, and this is where experience sometimes comes in, where you have that confidence to proceed without all the answers. And I think when we're all starting out, you say, I need to have all the details and the map of the entire journey before I can do anything. But sometimes when you've got enough experience, you say, okay, I'll figure this part. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. And the experience has told me that I can cross bridges, so I'll be good. 100%.
Okay, Jeff, the next part we do with every interviewer, which is a rapid fire questions. You have no idea what are these questions. So super, super excited to ask you this. All right. Favorite programming language?
Let's see. Right now, I'm doing a lot of 3D programming in a language called OpenSCAD.
Okay. Favorite Amazon leadership principle?
Dive deep.
Nice. AWS region that you use the most?
US East 1.
Nice, the original one, the OGs.
Yes.
Nice. A Mac or PC?
PC.
You know, it's funny. Same, because I always built my own computer when I was in college. I would build computer to get money. So even though Mac came and I was a gamer, so I always prefer PCs, even though Mac is the more cool hype thing.
Agreed. At this point, all of the Windows keyboard shortcuts are just deeply ingrained in my fingers and my brain. And I'm very, very much into using the keyboard as primary communication. And then having to reach for the mouse is like, okay, there's something wrong with my understanding of the shortcuts if I have to reach for the mouse.
100%. And then when folks say, how do you run like a workshop which requires Linux and stuff? I say, I just do Cloud9, right? It's so much easier. Everything is saved. Every command runs there. I have all the history. Cool. Okay, a new service just came out. What's your favorite way to learn? Read the documentation, blog, watch a video, try hands-on, or something else. This is assuming you don't have the preview. Generally, you have the preview of all new services.
It's going to be read the PR FAQ and then use the service.
Got it. Okay.
But I will say that one of the things that I like to do is after I've been using something for a while, then I will go and read or reread the documentation. We have this RTFM phrase in our industry But I like RRTFM, where it's reread the manual, because you will often, after having used something, that second reading will give you a lot of more perspective on the features that you glossed over the first time, or even better understanding of the things that you're already using. So rereading a manual, there's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. Next question. You have been to all over the world, Jeff. Any city that you are very fond of outside of Seattle, of course?
So I would say if I had to like pick one city where I'd spend a lot of time, it would be Tokyo.
Nice. I always wanted to go to Japan. So I got to make sure I visit Japan. Cool. Favorite way to read, Kindle, paperback, or audiobook?
It's a toss-up between Kindle and paper. I have plenty of paper books here, and I still enjoy reading that way. But if I'm traveling, I'll be okay with the Kindle.
Kindle. Yeah, I love paperback. I love taking notes and everything. But I think at this point, my wife is like, we cannot have any more paperback books. The basement is full. So I'm trying to adapt.
There's something about the fact that once you've interacted with a book and bent the corners and highlighted and copied things out, that it's a more memorable experience.
100%, 100%. When is the purple hair coming back, Jeff?
All right, I think I've got family permission for probably one more time. And that one more time will probably be whenever I decide to retire, and it will be my final reinvent. That's when. So we're years away from that at this point, but.
Got it. Got it. Cool. If you can have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would that be?
I will have dinner with my wife.
Okay, excellent. And what kind of restaurant or food will you take your wife to?
Oh, almost anything that's like well seasoned and spicy. We'll be happy with.
Okay, excellent. And last question, Jeff, what are you most proud of?
I'm proud of my children and my grandchildren.
Excellent. How can people connect with you, Jeff?
All right, I'm on LinkedIn, and you can find me there. I'm happy to connect. And I'm occasionally on X and a couple other platforms, but LinkedIn is the best place to find me.
Also, personally, Jeff, it was my dream come true that I'm interviewing you. Honestly, like 10 years back, when I started my cloud journey, I would Google how to do stuff. And then at one point, I'll just search it and I'll do plus Jeff Barr in Google so that it just shows your blogs. Because, it's very easy to explain something in a very complex way. There is no beauty in that.
Exactly.
Only when you understood it deeply, then only you can explain it in a simplest form.
Exactly. Now, the funny thing is my sons, Stephen and Andy, are both in tech and using AWS. And they tell me the same thing where they're doing a search and they land on the content. It's like, oh, my dad wrote that. And it's actually pretty funny for them when they're in their working environments that they land on my content. Awesome. This was really fun. Really appreciate the invitation.